All right. If you are new here, my name is Joseph Brevent. I am a data analyst and data scientist working at a medium-sized logistics company here in Sterling, Virginia. And it's my mission to help other logistics companies just like yours grow and scale using their existing data and AI. So let's get right into it. So this episode, we're going to be talking about how to predict how many drivers you need. Let's give yourself a quick scenario. Let's say that you're growing with a contract, and that contract is calling for more trucks. You're opening up more leases. You're trying to balance the existing, I guess, your ebbs and flows of that contract. One day you got, let's say, 10 loads on a Monday. On Tuesday, you got 12 loads. Let's say on a Wednesday, you got 4 loads. Okay, right? Let's say this is week one. Okay, let's say we're going to use 2 or 3 months of data to predict. You really want more, but let's just say we're going to go with 2 or 3 months. So on Monday of week one, you got 10 loads. On Tuesday, you got 12 loads. On Wednesday, you got 4 loads, right? Let's say on Thursday, they hit you with 18 loads, okay? And let's say on Friday, they hit you with 6 loads, right? Now let's say that this is consistent. So you have week one, okay? You have week two, something similar. Let's say Monday, we get 9, 15, 12, you get 3, and on Friday we get hit with 8. Okay? Let's say week 3 continues, week 4, and so on. And so what this looks like is you'll have a graph like this, okay? And you're gonna have data that will be spiking. Let's say we start from 0, and be spiking up and down. Sorry, my board has a rivet there. Up and down. What you're trying to plan for is your client says, hey, we're going to have a 20% increase, a 30% increase in volume. And you're saying, well, what does that mean? Because I have no idea how to properly plan hiring wise, staff wise, for this kind of volatility. Okay. Now, within the data, there's going to be a third line that you may or may not see. There's going to be a trend line. So, right in the middle of this line here, let's do a different color. There's going to be a trend line. Okay. This trend line here is going to tell a story. Okay. In data science, we may use something like standard deviation. We may use something like standard variance, right? You know, we may use some different kind of mathematical equation to predict where your trend line would go if these average numbers, let's say we have 4 weeks, okay? So I put 2 weeks there. Let's predict that we have 4 weeks. So we have, I'm just going to do Monday, for example, 12, and then we have 9, okay? All 4 of these numbers are going to equal a mean or average, okay? And then we can deviate, do a standard deviation from that mean, that average, to come up with a projection of what that would look like if you were to increase by a certain percentage. Okay, so what does this all mean for you? Well, if you're hiring and you're trying to figure out, well, Joe, how many people do I hire? Because right now I got 16 guys. Yeah, so you say, Joe, out of my 16 guys, only 3 of them are barely working. They're only working when it gets really, really busy. And I don't want to hire too many people at once. Okay, and you're trying to use some form of your data to predict that. Now, the more data that you have, the better that this formula is going to work. But technically speaking, we're going to use something called a Sierra Max time series model. Okay, And all that means in data science terms is we're going to use a model based on time as an equation to predict how many people that you're going to need for the future. So let's say month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4. Okay. Let's say month 1 is the base, and let's say throughout the month you're peaking at 21 drivers. Okay, but your average is 18. Now let's say month 2 you had a really big day where you peaked at 26 drivers. Okay, but your average is, let's say, still 18. Okay, let's say month 3 your average, you had a big day, you had 31 drivers. That's a great day. I think for any medium-sized logistics company, that's going to be a great day. However, your average only went up to 22. Okay, you're trying to figure out, how do I staff for this? How do I predict how many people I need to bring into my staff to properly staff this project? Because I don't want to turn down a big day, but I also don't want to hire too many people to where I have 31 people on staff, and on average, only 22 of them are working, right? Maybe you might want to hire some part-time people. Maybe you might want to figure out how to properly hire your core staff and maybe double up on certain runs, stagger some runs, maybe do some in the morning, do some in the evening. But the basis of it is you're going to be relying on the information to answer that question. So that begs to ask, okay, well, if they say that month 1, let's say it was ground zero, okay, that was your average business. Let's say in month 2, it increased by 10%. Let's say in month 3, it increased from 0 to 12.2%. Okay. Let's say in month 4, it increased to 14 to 15%. And they're projecting a 25, 30% growth. This is happening to a lot of companies all over the country because of all the data centers opening. Everyone's getting these data center contracts and they're trying to figure out how to adapt to this new way of doing logistics. Okay. So you want to figure out, I have a staff of 18, let's say 20. And how many drivers do I need in month 4 with the 15% increase from month 2? Okay. What does that look like? Right? What does that look like? And that's where you can use your data. So you can use your information, your past points. Now, it's a few things I want you to consider when you're hiring people. Okay, that's going to be churn. And churn is just a fancy word for how often people drop out of your program. So we're just going to make some space for this. So I want you to consider churn. Now, when you're hiring, there's several factors you may not consider. One is proximity. How close does this candidate, excuse my stick figure, how close does this candidate live to your business? Okay, that's a big one. You'd be surprised if you were to look through your data, you'll see that a lot of people who drop off very, very quickly typically live over an hour away, and the commute is difficult to get up. In logistics, we're all morning guys, right? We're getting up 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 3 a.m. to do a run. If a guy has to come from an hour and a half away, he may not last that long. Okay. Another one is experience. Okay. I've found that there's a sweet spot in finding guys who are a few years into trucking that may last at least 2 years with you. That sweet spot for us, and I'll explain this to you in another video, but that sweet spot for us has been 3 years of experience. Okay. Somebody who has 3 years of experience, they may stay for 2 to 3 years if you give them the right conditions. You might get lucky, you might get a hire that may stay with your company for 10, 15 years under the right conditions. Okay, so experience. Another one, a big one that I've been actually playing into quite a bit lately is age. How old is your candidate? Okay. Unfortunately, a lot of it's kind of double-sided. A lot of our older candidates don't last that long, and a lot of our younger candidates do not last that long. It seems that the sweet spot for our company has been between 30 to 40 years old. Okay. Now, why is that important? Because if you put a system in place when you're hiring to look for certain factors, let's say someone who lives within uh, a 30 to 45-minute commute, right? Who has 3 to 5 years of experience, nothing more, nothing less, and who's 30 to 40 years old, you might be surprised that an overwhelming percentage of the people who have stayed with your company for over a year may fit a certain profile. Now, why that's important is that two things can happen. One, if you're posting for jobs on a job site like Indeed, like Craigslist, like CB Driver, like truckdriver.com, and you're sifting through all of your applications, as opposed to bringing in a bunch of truck drivers that are not going to last long with you, it may do you some justice to just filter out the right people, right? And to look at your past performance. And hey, it's trucking. Guys are not going to stay with you forever. You know, I feel like we're fortunate to get 2 years out of a good driver. If we can get 4 or 5, that's great. You know, we want guys to stay with us for 5, 10, 15 years, but that's just not the reality of the business. People get burnt out. They don't want to drive anymore. And I understand that, right? So, I mean, 2 years for me is a great, I guess you could say, turnaround time, churn time for a good driver. So if we can get 2 years out of a guy and he gets acclimated into our system, he learns our processes, he learns our training, right? And he takes maybe a month or two to get acclimated into our business, it would be extremely beneficial to us to target people who historically, over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, have met the certain criteria to actually last in our business, okay? And your data can uncover that. So using your data to help you hire is extremely important. If you guys want any help in how to read your data, how to transform those columns from words, right, from a bunch of names, and you want to transform them into something that a computer can understand, like a series of numbers, okay? It's called data transformation. If you want any help in how to properly use LLMs or how to do data science to help you guys figure out some of these problems, please reach out to us at Green Sea AI. We're more than happy to help. Peace.